The cardboard box wasn't heavy. That was the worst part. 14 years of my mother's life fit into a single cardboard box, and I was the one carrying it out of St. Michael's Hospital on a Tuesday afternoon in November. My brother hadn't shown up. He said he had a meeting he couldn't reschedule. I didn't say anything. I never did. The drive back to Sudbury took 4 hours in the snow. I had the heat cranked all the way up and still couldn't stop shaking. Not from the cold, from the silence. From the way the box sat on the passenger seat like it was waiting for me to say something to it. My name is Claire. I'm 31 years old. I'm a registered nurse, and for the past 6 years I have worked double shifts at a long-term care facility, while also being the only person who showed up every single Sunday to visit our mother as she disappeared, piece by piece, into early-onset Alzheimer's. My brother's name is Daniel. He's 34. He lives in a nice condo in downtown Toronto with heated floors and a view of the lake. He works in finance. He's very busy. He's always been very busy. Our mother's name was Patricia. Everyone called her Pat. She made the best butter tarts in Northern Ontario. She sang off-key to every Shania Twain song that came on the radio, and she spent the last 3 years of her life not knowing my name. She still knew Daniel's, though, even at the end, even when she'd forgotten mine. I used to tell myself it didn't matter. The will reading was scheduled for the Thursday after the funeral. Our mother's lawyer, a quiet man named Mr. Arsenault, had an office above a Tim Hortons in the old part of town. The stairs creaked. The waiting room smelled like old paper and burnt coffee. Daniel was already there when I arrived, wearing a wool coat that probably cost more than my monthly grocery budget. He gave me a hug that lasted exactly 2 seconds. "You look tired," he said. "I just buried our mother," I said. He nodded like that explained something, and looked back down at his phone. Mr. Arsenault read the will slowly, the way people do when they already know the contents are going to be uncomfortable. Our mother had 2 assets of any significance. The first was the house, the 3-bedroom bungalow on Lorne Street, where we'd grown up, where I had moved back into the basement suite 4 years ago to help with her care, where I had repainted the kitchen and fixed the leaking pipe under the bathroom sink and shoveled the driveway every single winter morning before my shift started. The house went to Daniel. The second asset was a small piece of commercial property on the edge of town, an old hardware store that had been closed for years, the kind of building with a faded painted sign and boards over 2 of the front windows. Our grandfather had owned it, then our mother, and now apparently, me. I stared at the paper in my hands. I read the line 3 times. Daniel didn't even try to hide his relief. On the drive home, he called me. I almost didn't answer. "I just want you to know," he said, "I think Mom made the right call. You're practical. You'll figure out what to do with the building. Sell it, probably. It's not worth much, but it's something. The house is worth $400,000, Daniel. Claire. I lived there. I took care of her. For 6 years. You chose to do that. Nobody forced you." I pulled into a gas station and sat in the parking lot for a long time after I hung up. The snow was coming down hard. A transport truck hissed past on the highway. I called my best friend Mara and she answered on the first ring and I didn't even have to explain. She just said, "Come over," and I did. I cried on her couch for about an hour and then I went home. To the basement suite, in a house that now legally belonged to my brother. He called 2 days later to let me know he was listing it in the spring. "You'll want to start thinking about where you'll go," he said. Not unkindly. That was somehow worse. I had 3 months. I started going to the hardware store out of something that wasn't quite a plan. It was more like I needed somewhere to go that wasn't my shrinking basement suite, somewhere that belonged to me even if I wasn't sure what it meant yet. The building was on a corner lot on Mackenzie Street, a 10-minute drive from the hospital. 1 story, solid brick, built in the 60s. My grandfather had run it until he retired. After that it had sat empty for almost a decade, collecting dust and property tax bills. I had a key. I didn't know why I'd never used it before. The first time I walked in, I stood in the middle of the main floor and listened to the silence. It was the particular silence of a place that had been waiting. Pegboard walls with the ghost shapes of tools still visible where they'd hung, an old cash counter along the back wall, a calendar from 2009 still pinned beside the office door. I walked through slowly, running my hand along the counter, breathing in the smell of old wood and machine oil and something underneath that I couldn't name. There was a door at the back of the office. I assumed it was a storage room. It had a padlock on it that was different from the others, newer, heavier. The key ring my mother's lawyer had given me had 4 keys on it. 3 of them I'd already placed. The 4th was smaller, with a square head. It fit. I don't know what I expected. Boxes of old inventory, maybe. A rusted shelving unit. Whatever my grandfather had left behind. What I found was a room that had been actively, deliberately maintained. A metal shelving unit along one wall, organized and labeled. 3 banker's boxes, sealed and stacked. A small wooden desk with a single drawer. On top of the desk, a manila envelope with my name on it, my full name, Claire Margaret Fontaine, written in my grandfather's handwriting. My grandfather had been dead for 11 years. My hands were shaking when I picked it up. Inside was a letter, 8 pages long, handwritten on graph paper the way he always wrote everything. He'd been an engineer before he opened the store, and he'd never lost the habit. And underneath the letter, a series of documents, financial records, a secondary will, properly notarized, the business card of a lawyer in North Bay I'd never heard of. I sat down on the floor of that room and I read. My grandfather had known. Not everything he hadn't known about the Alzheimer's, hadn't known about Daniel's indifference, or my double shifts, or the 6 years I would spend doing the work of keeping a family from dissolving entirely. But he had known something about the shape of people. He had watched his grandchildren grow, and he had seen the difference between the one who helped him stack inventory on Saturday mornings and the one who had better things to do. He'd seen who called on birthdays and who forgot, who came to Christmas dinner and who sent an Interact transfer at the last minute and called it even. He'd loved Daniel. That was clear from the letter. He'd wanted to believe Daniel would grow into it, so he'd left the decision to our mother, quietly setting aside the property and the contents of that room, a secondary account he'd maintained separately, untouched, for exactly this kind of moment, with instructions that only the child she truly trusted should receive them. He hadn't told her what was in the room, only that she would know when it was time, and who deserved the key. She had given me the key. Even at the end, even when she'd forgotten my name, some part of her had remembered what mattered. I sat on that floor for a very long time. The account had $94,000 in it. I want to be clear about what I did not do next. I did not call Daniel and tell him what I'd found. I did not call Mr. Arsenault, or the lawyer in North Bay, or Mara. I sat with it for 4 days. I went to work. I did my shifts. I ate toast for dinner and stared out the basement window at the snow accumulating against the window well, and I thought about who I wanted to be. I thought about what my grandfather had written near the end of the letter. He'd said, "The point was never the money, Claire. The point is that you will know what to do with it, and that is the only inheritance that actually matters." I called the lawyer in North Bay on a Friday morning. Her name was Miss Tremblay, and she was expecting my call. She said she'd been holding the file for 3 years, waiting. She walked me through everything clearly and without rushing me. The secondary account was clean. The will was valid. The transfer of the property to me under the original estate terms was unambiguous. Everything had been done properly, quietly, through a separate process my grandfather had initiated long before he died. I was within my rights. Everything was mine, legally and completely. Then I drove to Toronto. Daniel opened the door in sweatpants, which meant I'd caught him off guard, which I'd intended. He stared at me for a second and then stepped back to let me in. His condo was as nice as I'd imagined. The floors were heated. You could see the lake from the living room window, gray and frozen in December. I sat down on his couch and I put a folder on his coffee table. "What is this?" he said. "Read it." He sat down across from me and opened the folder. I watched his face. I'd known my brother for 31 years. I knew the specific way his jaw tightened when something wasn't going the way he'd planned. I watched it happen slowly as he turned the pages. When he got to the account balance, he stopped reading. He set the papers down. He looked at me for a long moment. "Mom knew about this? She's the one who gave me the key." He was quiet for a while. Outside the window, a ferry was crossing the harbor, moving slowly through the ice. I waited. "I didn't think," he started, and then stopped. Tried again. "I knew you were doing a lot. With Mom. I knew that." "Did you?" I told myself you were closer to her. Geographically. That it made more sense for you to be the one. Daniel, I kept my voice even. I need you to hear me say this clearly. I did not choose to be the only one. I chose to show up. Those are different things. And I need you to understand that difference before we talk about anything else. He looked at the floor. For a moment he looked very young, the way he used to look when we were kids, and he'd done something he knew was wrong and hadn't figured out yet how to admit it. "You're right," he said quietly. "I know you're right." We sat with that for a while. I had thought, in the weeks between finding the room and coming to Toronto, about what I wanted. I'd been honest with myself about the anger, about the part of me that wanted to walk in there and simply say, "I don't need you to understand. I have the house and the account and the building, and none of this requires your permission or your acknowledgement." I could have done that. I had chosen not to. Not because I was trying to be virtuous, but because I'd spent 6 years watching what bitterness does to a family, and I didn't want to start a new chapter carrying it with me. "I'm not selling Grandpa's store," I said. "I'm going to fix it up and open it. I haven't decided exactly what yet. Maybe a hardware store again, maybe something else. But it's going to be something, and it's going to be mine." Daniel nodded. "And I'm going to find a place to live that I actually want to live in, not a basement suite." "I can push back the listing," he said. "Give you more time." 6 months, I said. "And I want first right to buy it." He looked up. "I'm serious. If I can secure financing, I want the chance to buy the house. Market value. No discounts. Just the chance to make an offer before it goes on the market." He thought about it for a long moment. Then he said, "Okay. I also need you to acknowledge that things are going to be different between us going forward. I'm not interested in being the responsible one while you're the busy one. That's done." "I know," he said. He stopped, rubbed the back of his neck. "I'm sorry, Claire. I mean that. I should have been there." He should have been. And saying it didn't erase the years. I knew that, and I think he knew that I knew that. But it was a start. I drove back to Sudbury in the dark, 5 hours through a snowstorm, with CBC Radio 1 keeping me company across the top of Georgian Bay. I had a coffee in a travel mug and the defroster going full blast, and somewhere around Parry Sound I started to cry a little, not from sadness exactly, but from the release of something I'd been holding for a very long time. I thought about my mother's hands. How she used to braid my hair when I was small. How in the last year, when she didn't know my name anymore, she would still sometimes reach out and touch my face when I sat beside her, like something in her body remembered what her mind had lost. She had known. She had given me the key. That spring, I signed a lease on a small apartment 2 streets over from the hardware store. I hired a contractor named Pete, who had the kind of practical competence that makes you feel like everything is solvable, and we spent 3 months going through the building room by room. The bones were good. The roof needed work. The wiring needed updating to code, which was expensive but not catastrophic. We kept the original wood floors, stripped and refinished. We kept the pegboard walls in the back workshop area. We kept the name Fontaine Hardware, which was what my grandfather had called it, painted in the same font above the door. It wasn't a hardware store. Sudbury already had enough of those. What it became, slowly and then all at once, was something more like a workshop and supply space, a place where you could buy quality tools, yes, but also rent workshop time, take a Saturday class on basic home repair, get advice from someone who actually knew what they were talking about. There was a demand for it that I hadn't predicted, and that turned out to be obvious once I saw it. People wanted to learn. They just needed somewhere to go. Mara helped me build the website. My grandfather's old ledgers, the ones in the banker's boxes, turned out to contain 40 years of local supplier contacts, many of whom were still in business and deeply pleased to hear that a Fontaine was opening the store again. Daniel came up for the opening. He brought his girlfriend, who was warmer than I'd expected, and he brought a bottle of wine and a card that said something genuine and a little clumsy in his handwriting, which was the most Daniel thing I'd ever seen him do. He also brought his toolbox, his real one, from when we were teenagers and we used to help our grandfather on weekends. He'd kept it all those years. I hadn't known that. We didn't hug for exactly 2 seconds this time. I'm not going to tell you that everything was resolved, that we became the family we should have been, that all the years of distance and imbalance and absence simply folded away because of one honest conversation and a bottle of wine at a store opening. That's not how it works. We are still figuring out how to be siblings in a way that doesn't default back to old patterns. There are still conversations we haven't finished having. But the store is open, and the house on Lorne Street, I made an offer in February, and Daniel accepted it, and I have been slowly, methodically, relearning every inch of it as mine. Not my mother's, not my childhood home, not a basement suite I was borrowing on borrowed time. Mine. I repainted the kitchen last month. Different color than before. Something warmer. My grandfather left me an envelope with my name on it, written in a dead man's handwriting, And inside was the understanding that he'd been paying attention all along. That someone had seen the work and known it was worth something. That responsibility is not a burden when it comes from love. I think about that when I'm opening the store in the morning, turning the key in the lock that still has the original hardware on it from 1967. I think about my mother in her chair by the window, reaching out to touch my face. "Steady hands," she used to say to me when I was learning to ride a bike, when I was learning to drive, when I was learning anything hard and frightening and worth doing. Steady hands. I didn't destroy him, I told Mara later that night, after Daniel had driven back to Toronto and she and I were cleaning up the opening event, sweeping sawdust and stacking folding chairs. She looked at me. "I knocked him down," I said. "And then I helped him get back up." She handed me a broom. "That's the only kind of winning that doesn't hollow you out," she said. I think she's right.